nowadays oncology is moving so fast that we're really discovering mutations and targets and drugs before we have. I mean, it's coming at us at such a pace, and there's such a direct correlation between therapies and mutations, and the potential opportunity to have improvement in outcomes, that the only way we're able to sort of bring those treatments to patients is through the conduit of clinical trials. Without clinical trials, we're basically rendering an entire arm of treatments, which are in many cases life-changing, unavailable to patients, because these drugs are coming out at such rapid paces, and because we understand the pathophysiology of the disease in a way that we never understood before. So when I think about clinical trials, when I'm making decisions about who to put on clinical trials, we know that for our patients who are in front of us, who are dealing with a life-threatening condition, that we want to provide them the best care possible. And so in some cases, the best care possible is standard of care. But in some cases, the standard of care is just not good enough. And if we know that a patient harbors a mutation where there's a drug that works dramatically for that patient, not providing that in the form of a clinical trial is oftentimes rendering or offering inadequate care. These drugs that are coming out to patients have gone through a lot of different studies already, in many cases, and so because of that, there's a lot of experience, and there's a lot of science behind why we're doing this. And so we really think carefully before we put patients on studies, and we identify studies that really only make sense for the patient based upon their disease and based upon their options. I think it's important to understand, I tell my students, spend the time, the first time you see a patient, really educating patients around their disease and their treatment. And not just their treatment in terms of side effects and dosing schedules and so on, but why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing, why we're giving the regimen we're giving. And when you do that, when you spend that time educating patients on the why, not just the how and the what, but the why, then you start to, it actually exposes the opportunities. Because when you start to explain the why of why we're doing this and how we got to this point and why this regimen we're giving you is the standard of care, but how this became the standard of care because it beat the previous standard of care when we added drug X to regimen Y, suddenly people say, okay, well, that's great. And sometimes I'll hear a patient say to me, well, what if we did this? And I can see the light bulb going off in their mind as well. And I'll say, well, funny you should ask. Well, interestingly enough, that very question is being asked today by a lot of investigators all over the country. And that's why we have a study today doing the exact thing you just asked, which is, can we make it better by virtue of adding a drug, to this cocktail of, that is currently the standard of care. And so I think that discussion around the why is really important. It takes time, and you have to really be able to sort of explain very complicated ideas sometimes to patients that may not have the background to understand that, but are still smart enough and are really dedicated, obviously, personally dedicated to understanding what they need to do to take their care in their hands with their physician and to provide themselves the best chance of a cure. So I think that is really important, and it helps open up the door to more of a receptivity from a patient around clinical trials, because they understand why we're doing what we're doing and why we're trying to improve the standard of care, and to make things better.